There are several recipes for paper soap floating around, but they're all basically the same. That's where I step in. I'm gonna experiment with 6 different well-known surfactants to see if I can find the one paper soap recipe to rule them all. Embarking on my quest, I want to figure out a recipe that'll check all the boxes. I want it to work with printer ink so I can read from it. I want it to fold well so I can make origami with it. I want the paper to be smooth and opaque and overall have a good texture. I want it to smell good. I want it to wash and lather well. And extra points if the ingredients are accessible and cheap. Speaking of ingredients, what is paper soap made of? Paper and soap. Go figure. But you can't just use any old paper. It needs to be made of stuff that can break down and biodegrade in water. Luckily, other soap makers have done their homework and discovered water-soluble paper, which is like printer paper in pretty much every sense, except it dissolves and biodegrades in water extremely quickly. It is thinner and slightly more translucent than printer paper, but that's not a huge deal to me. Water-soluble paper costs around 35 times more than printer paper. But if you think about it, one sheet can create like 16 sheets of paper soap, so if you add that all up, that's the Fellowship of the Ring right in your pocket. I've printed a fun 90s style design with lots of color and sharp edges so we can determine how much the ink bleeds when we apply the samples. I'll turn this sheet into little test squares. And now we can experiment with the soap component. Mind you, this can be any surfactant you can coat or soak the paper with. I've narrowed it down to 6 surfactants which I believe will work the best and that are the most accessible. 99% rubbing alcohol will be the control, and I'll fragrance each sample with 3% lemongrass verbena fragrance, unless the surfactant is already scented. First up is a ratio of 25% alcohol and 75% standard unscented dish soap. I don't really have high hopes for this one because dish soap doesn't really lather very well, and it's quite strong on your skin, so I wouldn't recommend the sample to those with a sensitive or eczema-prone epidermis. Applying this solution, I can see the printer ink is bleeding profusely, so this is an automatic out for me. It's a pity because dish soap is the cheapest and most widely accessible sample in this experiment because of course it is. Now before you finish typing,
Chris, stupid, why didn't you test the control first so we have something to compare everything to?
whoops! Second in line is Bath & Body Works Foamy Hand Soap, which I chose over one of their gel soaps because I don't need to dilute it with alcohol. You also don't have to use just Bath & Body Works soap, you can use any sort of foaming hand soap that comes as a liquid. Bath & Body Works soaps and candles, I know a lot of people find them too strong and expensive, and that they are, but their seasonal lineups for Halloween and Christmas are just irresistible. The sample is okay, it's definitely bleeding more than I would like. It's kind of giving gums after eating a really crunchy apple.
Very crunchy.
Not too bad, but I think it's disqualified. Third is a 1/4 ratio of alcohol and melted, unscented, no sweat, clear melt and pour soap. Now we're starting to get into more of the specialty ingredients. You can usually find it at any craft store that isn't Hobby Lobby because screw that place. I opted for a no sweat variety because I don't want the soap to attract glycerin beads and make the paper wet, which could happen with any old melt and pour soap you pick up at a craft store. Painting it on, I love the feeling of this sample. It almost applies to the paper like almost melted butter. Fourth is cocamidopropylbutane, or cocobutane for short. This is a liquid surfactant often used by bath bomb makers because it acts as a foaming agent. This one is weirdly paper phobic. It didn't bead or anything, it just sat there. I think we can say this one's out. Now, finally, we can test our control. Pure rubbing alcohol. Of all patches, I thought this one would bleed the most because pure alcohol is like notorious for breaking down dyes. What's wild is the alcohol did absolutely nothing.
It wouldn't be the first time I was hoodwinked by alcohol.
So from this, we can probably assume that perhaps it was the water content in both the dish soap and the Bath & Body Works soap that caused their respective subjects to bleed so much. Moving on to our fifth surfactant is a half-half ratio of alcohol and polysorbate 80. Poly 80 is another surfactant and emulsifier used in bath bombs to bind liquids and colorants, but it's also used in the food and pharmaceutical industries, so it's more widely available than cocobutane. This swatch isn't too bad. There's a tiny hint of bleeding, but the shapes are readable and I'm able to apply a nice even coat. The penultimate sample is a 4:1 ratio of alcohol and the potent surfactant sodium lauryl sulfate acetate, or SLSA powder. It's used in bath bombs and bubble baths because it has high foaming action. It's also apparently a laxative, so this is the one item that has many different purposes in your washroom. SLSA also doesn't really dissolve in the alcohol. It actually just kind of absorbs it and turns into a slush. Since it doesn't dissolve, it will inevitably leave a residue on the paper, so I can already tell I'm probably not going to like this one that much, but we'll still test it and see how it lathers. Lastly, we have the same thing, SLSA, except with a 95:5 ratio of alcohol to SLSA. Since SLSA is pretty powerful, I want to see if I could compromise a bit of the lather for less residue. And here we have our bubbly subjects. Let's evaluate. For the top row, the dish soap, Bath & Body Works soap, and Cocoa Betaine are probably all disqualified. The first two bled like the elevator in The Shining, and the cocoa is just patchy and weird and causing the paper to wrinkle. On the bottom row, the Poly 80 actually looks pretty promising. There's minimal bleeding. It does look a little wet, so I wonder if it'll actually like cure or dry into a better consistency. Time will tell. The SLSA samples look pretty okay as well. They're about as good as the melt and pour as far as bleeding goes, but they do have that chalky texture on top, so I'll let those sit for 24 hours so they have a chance to dry completely, and then we can conduct the bubble test. Now that they've all dried, I have a clear favorite. Could you guess which one it is? Let's see how they lather. First up is the control, which was just pure alcohol. We'll ignore that gigantic stain, which happened because as I was transporting the tray, it flew out and onto my wet countertop. Escape attempts never quite turn out the way you expect them to. Since the control is 99% rubbing alcohol, it doesn't really feel like anything, to be honest, and it leaves the water slightly cloudy, so that's pretty neat. Could you imagine if this one worked the best of all the paper soaps?
LOL, like I could not even.
Next is the dish soap, which actually dried pretty well, and this sample bled the worst of all the surfactants that we tested. Ink clarity gets 0 out of 5. I mean, that's a joke. Foldability, not gonna lie, I did all of the folding off camera because that's torturously boring, but it didn't hold folds very well. 2 out of 5. The paper feels a little rough. It's slightly wrinkled as far as the texture and appearance go, almost as if it was paper that got wet and then dried. So I'll give texture a 3 out of 5, but let's see if it bubbles. I give it a little dunk and scrub away, and wah wah, doesn't lather at all. It kind of looks like someone had a gnarly cold and used my hands as tissue paper. I'm giving the lather a 2 out of 5. Not great at all. It smells fine, but it's not too strong. 3 out of 5. As far as accessibility goes, you can grab dish soap at any grocery store, so 5 out of 5 for that. And as for price, dish soap is cheap, so also 5 out of 5. That gives paper soap derived from dish soap a score of 20 out of 35, or 57%. The Bath & Body Works foaming hand soap is similar to the dish soap in texture and appearance, but the bleeding was a bit more controlled. I'll give the ink clarity a 1 out of 5. It's the second worst bleeder of the experiment and would make reading challenging. Foldability gets a 3 out of 5 because it holds onto folds slightly better than the dish soap. The paper, like the dish soap sample, is a little wrinkled and a bit rough. The texture gets a 3 out of 5 for me. Giving the sample a dunk and a good scrub, it actually lathered okay, leagues better than the dish soap, and I think that's because since I was using pure soap rather than soap diluted with alcohol, there was a higher surfactant to paper ratio. Plus, Bath & Body Works soaps also have agents in them that are meant to encourage foam. It smells terrific and strong, so the smell is going to get a 5 out of 5 for me. I'm going to give the lather a 4 out of 5. Not only did it make some pretty good bubbles, but it felt nice too. Bath & Body Works soap is very accessible from where I'm from, but any liquid foaming soap from any brand would probably behave similar. I'll give it a 5 out of 5 for accessibility, and then 3 out of 5 for price because these soaps are a little expensive. That gives liquid foaming hand soap a score of 24 out of 35, or 69%. Next up is melt and pour soap, and I had my eyes on this one. This one looks pretty flawless. There's virtually no bleeding, but melt and pour naturally has a slight residue, so the paper is a bit waxy and sports a bit of a shine. For the ink clarity, melt and pour gets a 5 out of 5 for me. It preserved the ink the best out of the bunch. Foldability is also going to get a 5 out of 5. The folds are crisp and it almost sticks to itself, but not too bad. Texture is going to get a 4 out of 5. The paper is smooth and opaque with not a wrinkle in sight, but where it misses a point is with that inevitable waxiness. Lathering up with it was a tad discouraging. Its lather is almost in between the Bath & Body Works soap and the dish soap. The bubbles aren't huge, but the lather feels creamy in my hands. Also, something I just want to clarify is that poor lather doesn't mean the soap isn't working. I'm going to give the lather a 3 out of 5 because it was sort of in the middle of the road. The smell is going to get a 3 out of 5. For some reason, it takes a little more work to encourage the fragrance to come out. It's widely available online and at your local craft shop, but you'll seldom find it at the grocery store, so I'll give accessibility a 3 out of 5. As for price, you can pick up a pound for under $15 depending on the brand, so I'll give the price a 4 out of 5. That gives Melt and Pour soap a rating of 27 out of 35, or 77%. Cocoa betaine is up next, and take a look at that. It never absorbed into the paper, isn't that weird? The ink didn't bleed at all, so it has that lifeline going for it. Ink clarity is going to get a 5 out of 5 since the cocoa betaine didn't really touch the ink. Foldability gets a 4 out of 5. It actually folds surprisingly well because I think the piece of paper underneath is literally just preserved. Texture is getting a 0 out of 5 because I would not want to carry this on my person. It would just get everything oily and gross. Using it in my basin of warm water, I am disappointed to note that this one actually lathers the best so far. Those are bubbles. From Finding Nemo. Put that in there.
He likes bubbles.
Smell gets a 5 out of 5, no problem there. Lather gets the best score so far, 5 out of 5. Now accessibility. Cocoa betaine is a specialty ingredient. You can get it on Amazon for a pretty good price, but you probably need to go to a specialty soap retailer if you want to get it in person. So I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for that. The price is great. I can pick up a liter at my specialty soap shop Voyageur for just under $9, 5 out of 5 for price. So that gives cocoa betaine, surprisingly, a score of 26 out of 35, or 74%. Next in line is polysorbate 80, which unfortunately never dried. Ink clarity is going to get a 3 out of 5. It's mostly readable, but there is a slight hint of bleeding, and the transparency of the paper interferes with the clarity. Foldability gets a 2 out of 5. It held folds okay, but they weren't crisp. Texture is going to get a 0. While the paper is smooth and wrinkle-free, it's completely oily and wet feeling and useless. It actually tattooed the parchment underneath, so this one's disqualified, but let's see how it lathers just for giggles. Washing up, this one was poo. It hardly lathered, and it felt slimy and weird. Smell gets a 5 out of 5. Lather is the worst of all, so I'm going to give it a 0 out of 5. Accessibility is going to get a slightly better score than cocoa betaine, a 3 out of 5. I'll give the price a 4 out of 5. That leaves polysorbate 80 with a total score of 17 out of 35, or 49%. Hey, that looks like my final score in social studies. Our second last sample is SLSA at a 20% concentration. While there was no bleeding, I'll give the ink clarity a 4 out of 5 because there's a powdery film that sort of gets in the way. Foldability gets a 5 out of 5. It folds very nicely, being the driest of the samples that we've used. As far as texture goes, it feels like regular printer paper with baking soda on it. The texture isn't ideal for travel. I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for that. Dunking in the experiment water and washing up. It smells great, so it's going to get a 5 for that, and it lathers just like the Bath & Body Works sample. Very well, not exceptional like the cocoa betaine, but satisfactory. I'll give the lather a 4 out of 5. You're not going to find this ingredient easily in person, but you can buy it online quite easily. I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for that. This one is the priciest surfactant that we've tested. I'll give the price a 2 out of 5. That gives 20% SLSA a score of 24 out of 35, or 69%. Last in our experiment is the same as before, SLSA, but at a 5% concentration this time. In terms of basically everything, this one gets the same score as the previous sample. It's slightly less powdery, so I'll give it an extra point for texture. Lathering up, it actually bubbles identically to the 20% SLSA, which is surprising. Less is literally more here. That leaves 5% SLSA with a score of 25 out of 35, or 71%. I'll throw up a little table here so we can evaluate how each sample performed in each category. Melt and Pour and Cocoa Betaine had the highest ink clarity. All of them performed pretty well in foldability, except Polysorbate 80. Melt and Pour had by far the best texture, with the others being either too powdery or too oily or completely warped. It was outperformed by the rest in smell though, because it held onto the fragrance a little too well. Cocoa Betaine had by far the best lather, with Poly 80 being the worst. Dish soap won in both accessibility and price, sharing its top place in accessibility with Bath & Body Works foam, and sharing its price point with Cocoa Betaine, which also scored a 5 out of 5. The least accessible and most expensive honor goes to SLSA with the worst scores of the two. So the top paper soap surfactant that conquered them all is Melt and Pour soap. So I was sitting and thinking,
what sort of project could I do something creative with paper soap?
I want to make some type of a book or document so that you could read from it, but also tear the pages from it as you go. My first thought was recreating the Bill of Rights, because constitutional rights are just so disposable these days, but I thought that was a little edgy and decided on something a little more lighthearted. Stephen King's It. My dad lent me this a few years ago. I got halfway through and then never returned it. Thanks, Dad. Obviously, I'm not going to plagiarize the book in soap form because it's unfortunately protected by copyright, but you know what isn't protected by copyright? Nasty reviews. So I've compiled all my favorite negative reviews of this book into a properly formatted Photoshop document, printed that out, and then got to work. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing if you like this content, and like or share the video so YouTube learns it's good. Once the book is ready for publishing, I bind the pages with some melt and pour glue and let it solidify for a few hours. Here's the result. And there we have it, King's contentious brick of a work with the king of paper soap. You might be wondering why I opted for negative reviews for the actual book rather than like something wholesome.
Ugh, as if!
I think we successfully soapified this book. Just take it out, read it when you want, rip out the bad reviews, and wash up. It's so much more convenient than having hand sanitizer in your car. In any case, that was a soap journey in the soap universe. Thank you for watching. Bye.